Welcome to Reconquest on the Crusade Premium Channel, part of the Veritas Radio Network. This is Brother Andre Marie coming to you from St. Benedict Center in Richmond, New Hampshire. Our websites are Catholicism.org and Reconquest.net. My email address is bam@Catholicism.org. I can also be found easily on Twitter @Brother_Andre, and I'm also found on Facebook. Just search for Brother Andre Marie. Our topic this evening is bioethical nightmares. My guest is Jennifer Lahl, the founder and president of the Center for Bioethics and Culture, which is located in Pleasant Hill, California. That's in the East Bay of the San Francisco Bay Area. And the reason that I have Mrs. Lahl as my guest this evening is because back in January, the brothers from St. Benedict Center were in Concord, New Hampshire. We were participating in the Granite State's annual March for Life, which is always scheduled slightly before the National March for Life in Washington, D.C. And after the march, there's always a talk that's given in the church hall of St. John the Evangelist Parish, which is in Concord, the state capital. And, every year there's a pro-life speaker who speaks on some pro-life subject. Last year was a lady who's a friend of mine who happens to be she's a sort of a converted Planned Parenthood employee and now has a very lovely family. This year, I did not expect what I heard, even though I had been told ahead of time that I was going to hear something unusual. This year's speaker was tonight's guest, Jennifer Lahl. And she talked about some things that, as jaded as I am, I just couldn't believe that some of these things were possible in the realm of bioethics and biotechnology. Jennifer Lahl has 25 years of experience as a pediatric critical care nurse, then a hospital administrator, and a senior level nursing manager. So that's a combination of administrative and nursing work, I think, which set her up for some of the work she's doing now. To that very impressive skill set, she then added a master's degree in bioethics, and soon thereafter she founded the Center for Bioethics and Culture, which educates and informs people about ethical issues in healthcare, biomedical research, and biotechnological advancement. She also became an award-winning independent documentary filmmaker with 6 films to her credit on subjects such as embryonic stem cell research and assisted reproductive technologies. She moved into the area of filmmaking because, as she says, it's a story war, and the stories of the victims of these biotechnologies needs to get put into circulation so that we can understand some of the true problems with these biotechnologies and have a sound bioethics to deal with it. I was very moved by the talk that Mrs. Lahl gave, and I wrote a piece for Catholicism.org, a very short piece called Sick New World, which disclosed just a tiny little bit of what I heard from her talk. It's on Catholicism.org, and I'm going to link to it from the Reconquest.net page for this show. I think it's important for listeners to be aware of some of these things. I mean, some of this stuff I think is just a necessary public service announcement, especially if you have children, especially if you have daughters. They need to hear some of these things because they could actually be victimized one day by big biotech in ways that you might not have ever even heard of or thought possible. So without any further ado, I'm gonna bring in Jennifer Lahl. Good evening, Jennifer. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Of course, it's afternoon where you are because we have that 3-hour difference. You're in California, and I'm on the other coast. Now, first, could you tell us a little bit about what it is that the Center for Bioethics and Culture does?
Sure. We are, by IRS standing, a public benefit educational nonprofit. So it's within our mission to be educators of emerging technologies and biotechnologies and bring the public conversation to bear. Many people don't even realize what biotechnology is, let alone what biotechnology is going to be serving us all up pretty soon. And it's our belief that we as a public should be very informed and be part of the policy conversation about if we're going to have biotechnology, what does that look like? And where might we want to draw lines and say these are bright lines we don't want to cross because of unethical problems within the technology?
So essentially what the Center for Bioethics and Culture does is informs people and educates people about what's going on in these emerging technologies.
Correct. And we do that on various platforms. You know, you met me speaking, so I travel and speak. We produce documentary films, as you mentioned in the introduction. We're very active on Twitter and Facebook and, on our website, all the while educating people from, of course, our particular point of view. I mean, we definitely have a point of view about how biotechnology should advance and where are lines that we don't want to cross and things we don't want to do. Now,
I learned from you, so this is going to kind of start the conversation about the particular issues from left field. I learned from you the very startling revelation, kind of knocked me off my seat, sort of, almost literally, when I heard you talking, that there are now approximately 1 million or almost 1 million frozen embryos in the United States. Can you tell our listeners how it is that the babies got into the freezer?
Sure. And I would just sort of describe that better by saying nearly 1 million frozen human embryos. I mean, we have lots of, cow embryos and sheep embryos, but these are human embryos. And the United Kingdom has well over 2 million. So this just shows how bad this problem is and how out of control it is. And probably your listeners like you were not even aware of that, especially the scale of that. And I like to explain to people that in our work, we focus on the issues of taking human life and making human life and faking human life. The taking of human life issues are pretty well understood by pro-life people. Abortion, assisted suicide, euthanasia, capital punishment, where we can actually take human life, which we've been able to do since the beginning of time. Just read the Old Testament. We have the first murder right there in the Old Testament. But then biotechnology allowed us to make human life. We make human life now in the laboratory. We talk about reproduction, not procreation, but reproduction, which is manufacturing, making, technique, artifact. So we now can make human life, which is how we came to have nearly 1 million frozen human embryos, making human life in the laboratory, which began as an enterprise to help infertile couples. But now we have this problem with these souls on ice, if you will, just abandoned or frozen or left behind.
And then, so we'll probably get to faking human life a little bit later, but so they're there as a result of these different reproductive technologies, such as IVF or in vitro fertilization, which I understand is becoming old hat because there's new emerging technologies that look even more bizarre and sort of like something Hollywood would come up with. But when you gave the talk, you said that IVF is a failed technology, and it's a technology that's fraught with all kinds of ethical problems. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Absolutely. I mean, how many days and weeks do we have to talk about this?
Yeah, I remember. By the way,
that's the reality.
You brought up what's her name, Louise.
Brown.
Louise Brown, the British woman that was the first test tube baby. That's one of my earliest memories of like international news. I would think I was 8 years old. That was in 1978. I was 7 or 8 years old when that was announced, and the Browns had another test tube baby, or I guess petri dish baby, shortly after that, and then it became common practice. But So why do you say that it's a failed technology, and why do you say that it's fraught with all kinds of ethical problems?
Well, the data is just there. So, assisted reproductive technology, in vitro fertilization, IVF, all came about as this modern technology in order to help couples, mothers and fathers who otherwise couldn't have children, have their own biological children through these novel technologies. But if you look at the birth of Louise Brown, there was decades of research that happened before Louise Brown was finally born. It wasn't like they tried it once and we got a healthy baby. So there's just you have to realize that there has been a lot of unethical research that has been done on women and on unborn children in this enterprise to get us to the point where we can now make life in the laboratory.
So there was a lot of trial
just the ethics of that.
So there was a lot of trial and error. So and in the trial and error, women were experimented on, and fertilized embryos in petri dishes were experimented on.
Exactly, human life was experimented on in order to get a child. Now, the dirty little secret now is if you just follow the history of assisted reproductive technology since the birth of Louise Brown, it largely fails. It's very expensive technology. It's a high failure rate. I mean, the Centers for Disease Control, which is the only place that we get a little limited bit of data. They don't want the secret out because this is very expensive technology with huge profits. But if you look at the CDC's annual report, hundreds of thousands of IVF cycles are done every year in the United States, with about 23 to 25% of them succeeding.
Are at risk. And that's not being disclosed or talked about.
So you said that there was a 27% success rate with IVF?
Correct.
So that means that if my math is right, then there's 77% of failure rate?
Yeah, and when you talk about the 27% success rate, all that means is that baby was born alive in the delivery room. And that's what a live birth means. That could mean that the child dies 5 minutes later, but it still gets recorded as a live birth. It doesn't get recorded that the child was born with any kind of defects because of the technology and the way in which this child was created. So it's a little bit of information, but it's not all the information. My point when I speak to people is that, did you know that IVF cycles overwhelmingly fail? Did you know that there's cancer risk to women who take fertility drugs? Did you know that the studies are now coming out showing that the children might not be all right because of the way in which they've been created? Did you know that this is going to cost you tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars to maybe get a baby? And is that really a wise thing for us to be even celebrating or encouraging?
So people are making a lot of money. Some people are making a lot of money on this.
Yes,
so
bet.
That's why it's happening to begin with. It's not just that it's fulfilling a need or a perceived need. It's because there's a lot of money to be had here.
There's a lot of money to be had here, which means there's a lot more incentive not to fully disclose the realities of this enterprise.
I was reading the other day about Louise Brown, and the doctor who actually won I think he won a Nobel Peace Prize for it.
Robert Edwards.
Yeah, Robert Edwards did not disclose to the Browns that this had never succeeded before with humans.
And that's called human experimentation without consent of the person.
Yeah. Even the Wikipedia article says there were serious ethical questions about informed consent after that was revealed.
Yes, I mean, there's so much. If you just read the old early literature in this field, doctors were using their own sperm to inseminate their patients and not even telling the women that they were using, their own sperm, because for some reason they determined that the husband's sperm wasn't, of good quality or something.
Oh my goodness. Wow. So they did a bait and switch in the lab. That's unbelievable. Wow. Yeah, I mean, I keep having these oh wow, that's gross or evil or wicked type moments all throughout your talk. You must be used to that, right?
I am, and of course, this is very sensitive topics. So I get a lot of very angry people, that come to my events and scream and yell at me. I get death threats on Twitter. When you have a tiger by the tail, and you're messing with a multi-billion-dollar a year industry and stirring the pot, they don't like it. When you're messing with people's livelihood that really desperately wants a child and are willing to spend as much money as they can possibly spend in the hopes that they will get a child, this. And I'm sympathetic to that. I mean, I am a nurse first. I understand that people want and long and desire for children. I mean, God gives us those longings. He wants us to be fruitful and multiply and, all those wonderful things. But, again, it gets me back to our work. Our work is focused on the ethics, not can we do it, but should we do it? And what are all the consequences of these kinds of technology? At first blush, people think, it's great. We're helping people have babies.
Yeah.
What's wrong with that?
Yeah, and of course, the emotional appeal is a lot of this. And I guess that's why you get into the film thing, because the other side is constantly making emotional appeals. And because they have no real logical cogency behind their argument, they have to resort to this sort of existentialist argument. They have to resort to the emotional appeal, whereas our cold, hard logic doesn't always appeal to people. So you're trying to bridge the gap by making films that have both the emotional appeal, which actually helps to sort of front the good ethics, right?
Exactly. And the emotional appeal, which we put forward in our powerful stories of the victims, if you will, that have been harmed, is also backed up with, as much scientific evidence and data as we can possibly, provide in still what's relatively a new technology that we're learning and making stuff up as we go. Because we don't want to just appeal to people's emotions and go, this is bad, you might get hurt, this is awful. That's true, you might get hurt, but it's like with smoking, we appeal to people on an emotional level. You don't want to do this, you might get lung cancer, that's a horrible disease, don't get it. But also with facts and evidence and, and changing our laws and policies to better inform people so that they will say, I don't want to smoke. And so in our work, it's like, I don't want to exploit another woman's body so I can have her eggs or her womb, or I don't want to risk my own personal health or my unborn child's health by using this risky kind of technology. I don't want to be a poor steward of my financial resources.
Okay, now let's get into the question of those women who were victimized and exactly what this means. So aside from IVF being, as you say, a failed technology, less than a quarter, quote, success rate, and that's just the minimal success of a live birth, and it turns out that we're seeing that there are defects, that there are birth defects and so forth that come from this that could be caused by the process by which these children were conceived. But now let's get a little bit into how this stuff actually happens, because this frequently involves egg donation, correct?
Or sperm donation, or a surrogate womb, or a combination of all three.
Okay, so we don't need to talk about sperm donation because, well, for obvious reasons, it's simple. It's pretty straightforward. But as you said in your talk, I think you said somebody does something disgusting in a cup, and that's it. It's very simple. But when you're talking about egg donation, this is quite exploitive of women. And I believe one of your films is called Exploitation, about this subject. So can you tell us why it is that this whole egg donation thing is exploitive of women?
Well, sure. Back to my earlier career as a nurse, where is it in medicine that we encourage, and often with large sums of money, people who aren't patients, people who aren't sick, to take medications and undergo surgery and anesthesia for a procedure that they have no medical need? That right there, to me, is exploitative. Mm-hmm. Because you're asking somebody who there's no illness, there's no treatment here. And these women are doing this largely because the marketing is very slick. Be an angel, help somebody, make dreams come true. And oh, by the way, we'll pay you 10, 15, 20, and on up, thousands of dollars, which is very much an incentive. That's corruption of medical informed consent. Because even if you do properly inform people of the risk, if they have financial need, they will roll the dice and take risk with their own health. Medicine has no business taking healthy people and incentivizing them to do something that's not in their own best health interest, and especially by adding money to sweeten the pot. The other element of it is that we have never once done any long-term studies on what it does to these young women's bodies to fill them with large doses of very powerful hormones. If you're paying a young woman $25,000 for eggs, you don't want one egg like a normal ovulatory cycle. It's one egg a month, maybe two, and that's how you get twins. These women are aggressively stimulated with high-dose hormones in order to produce 20, 40, 50, 60 eggs in one cycle. Mm. which immediately throws their bodies into this strange syndrome called ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome, which can have all kinds of very harmful, risky short-term risks. They can lose their own fertility. They can have a stroke. 2 women in my film both had strokes immediately from doing this. They can lose an ovary. And then the longer term unknowns, because we know in infertile women who are patients, because we've done studies on them, that there's a direct link to fertility drugs and cancers. We've never studied healthy women. What happens when you take a healthy woman and put her on high dose hormones and bombard her with these kinds of high doses of these drugs as far as cancers? And so 2 women in my film both went on to develop breast cancers as young women. And breast cancer normally is a 50-year-old women. Women get it in their late 40s, 50s, even their 60s. Women in their 20s and 30s very rarely get breast cancer.
How old were these girls that got the breast cancer?
One was in her late 20s, one was in her early 30s. Okay. And egg donors are screened out. Do you have a history of breast cancer? No, I have no medical history of breast cancer. So they had no medical history of the disease, but then went on to get it. Now, I can't prove that the reason they got breast cancer was the fertility drugs, but it does mean we should study this. And it does mean we need to stop taking healthy people who aren't patients and having them undergo very onerous, rigorous medical procedures in order to help somebody else.
And of course, the problem with studying it is if you experiment on them, you're essentially experimenting on humans, and that's unethical too.
Exactly.
So
you don't allow organ donors to be paid. You can't, sell your kidney today, even though people are dying waiting for a transplant, or an organ. And nobody's going to die of a barren womb. You might be very sad. You might be grieved. You might have, lost dreams and hopes of having a child. But it's not a terminal illness the same way as somebody who's waiting for a kidney transplant is.
Yeah.
But we do not allow people to sell their organs because we don't want money to corrupt people's decision making for their own health interest.
Now, you spoke at the pro-life talk about the targeting of college-age girls, and you talked a little while ago about the slick advertising, but I understand that Facebook, which of course has all these wonderful algorithms because people tell Facebook all about them, so they know how old you are, so they'll feed you up ads. They know what your sex is, so college-age girls are getting fed ads through Facebook and lots of other media. Be an angel, help some other woman have a baby. And they're getting this kind of slick marketing, as you say, and they're also told that they can make money doing it. And in a sense, they're not getting the informed consent they're not getting the information that they need to make an informed consent. And they're being, as it were, seduced into this by marketing to make money off of hyperovulating and selling their eggs. This is a real danger that parents need to know about, and that college age girls need to know about.
Absolutely. And, that's why I spend a lot of my time showing my film on college campuses and speaking to universities. I mean, universities allow these, I call them egg poachers, because they just make me so angry, to advertise in campus newspapers. Students should organize, parents should organize and say, we don't want these ads, running in our kids' school newspaper.
Yeah.
Several years ago, the federal government passed a law banning credit card companies from advertising in school papers and on college campuses because we were concerned about kids getting credit cards and racking up debt. Well, shouldn't we be concerned about their own health and their future fertility?
Yeah. Yeah, well, maybe instead of burning down Berkeley over Yiannopoulos, the activists could focus their energies on doing this kind of thing.
Exactly.
And now you also spoke, I believe it was to the European Parliament in Brussels, about, tell us what brought you there to testify.
Yes, well, eggs are tiny, and eggs can be frozen and shipped all around the world. And if your listeners don't believe me, just Google World Egg Bank. And there's this huge competition amongst the egg poachers, if you will, to just have vats and vats and vats of eggs. Well, where else can you go to countries where women are relatively healthy and women are of a certain genetic, disposition, if you will, that people would want to make children that look like them? Well, there you have Eastern Europe. You have a relatively, white community. This is mostly white people industry, if you will, because it's so expensive. And they could go to these poor women in Eastern Europe and, give them a few €100 for a lot of their eggs and freeze them and ship them all around the world to become the world egg suppliers. And there was some stories coming out in the press with women that were having, ill health and being harmed from this. And so the European Parliament invited me to speak. They had a big session on human egg trafficking. They actually used trafficking language and issued a resolution prohibiting the trafficking and trade in human eggs at the risk of their young women's health, which was wonderful. Now, it's still unfortunately happening because there's a seedy underground movement, and women can still be encouraged to hop on planes and go to other countries to do this. And so there's a lot of that travel and tourism. But that's what brought me to speak at the European Parliament that time.
So these women are, in order to get their eggs farmed so that they can sell them, so that they can be used in these reproductive technologies, they are given these drugs to hyperovulate, and some of them get these diseases, and you said some of them get strokes. One of them you talked about almost died. And you interviewed this woman that almost died, right?
Yeah, well, actually, quite a few women in the film Exploitation almost died. I mean, it was just quite tragic, each one of their individual stories, from either hemorrhage, bleeding that wasn't diagnosed right away, or having strokes, or one woman had a torsioned ovary that went undiagnosed for almost a week after the surgery to remove her eggs, after repeatedly going back to the clinic, and they kept telling her she was going to be fine. So, it's quite tragic. And my concern is, again, because we don't track and the industry doesn't want these stories out, there's not a lot of reporting that happens. So the industry pushes back on my work and says, well, there's risk to everything. Of course, there's always going to be some people that don't have a good outcome. And that's just sort of, the realities that we all live with. Just getting in your car, you take the risk of getting harmed and stuff like that. So we're committed to reporting on either film or print on all the stories that come across our desk. And women find me almost on a daily basis because of the work I do. When they go back to the doctor, when they go back to the fertility clinic after their problems, they're told overwhelmingly, not our problem, we didn't do anything wrong, this is something that's, not even related to you being an egg donor. So they don't get any kind of help from the medical community or the fertility clinics that are making huge amounts of money off these women.
Yeah, and how can these women possibly prove their case too? I mean, I can imagine. And
they don't have the resources. Largely for money. They can't hire an attorney to help them. Yeah,
well, that was going to be my next question. Have any of these ladies actually litigated something successfully against these companies?
Two of them have, and they were both women that had immediately short-term harms done to them, so it was much easier to make a case of cause and effect. The harm that they suffered was a result of the procedure. The problem is that both of these women, which is very common in U.S. jurisprudence, settled out of court. So the whatever remedy was given is sealed, and they cannot forever talk about it.
Yeah, so
which is unfortunate because you can't say they were at fault and they had to pay X amount of money.
Yeah, they signed a non-disclosure agreement probably, so that they didn't.
It's very common.
So these companies are probably being rich. They're probably all lawyered up, so they can face these things with minimal impact to their bottom line.
Yes, and these women are counseled and meet with lawyers in order to sign the contract to become an egg donor. But what they find out afterwards when they have harms, that the lawyer represents the clinic and didn't represent them. So they're under the impression was, I have this lawyer who will be there for me. And then they find out, no. The lawyer was just making sure you understood the black and white of the contract. We don't represent you.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, when there's one lawyer at a meeting and it's not the one you brought, it's not your lawyer. Even I know that, and I live in a monastery. Now, you mentioned earlier surrogacy, so that's one other aspect of this total equation of IVF technologies. Oh, I got to do a reset. You're listening to Reconquest on the Crusade Premium Channel, part of the Veritas Radio Network. This is Brother Andre Marie. We're talking about biotech nightmare, and my guest is Jennifer Lahl, the founder and president of the Center for Bioethics and Culture, based in California. So, Jennifer, can you tell us a little bit about surrogacy and some of the problems that come with that?
Sure. Well, surrogacy, again, is another way of using a third party, if you will, to help you have a baby. We had some very famous early in the U.S. history of cases of surrogacy, the famous Baby M, Mary Beth Whitehead case, when a woman is not able to carry her own child to term. Well, she can find some lovely, nice, wonderful woman who will either for free or for money carry her baby to term for her. And that just sort of became one more additional way, if you will, to help infertile couples. Now we've seen a much bigger shift, now that we have same-sex marriage, where gay men are now hiring women to have babies for them. I use the Elton John illustration all the time because Elton John and his partner Furnished came to California twice. They bought eggs from one woman, they rented a womb from another, and now they're parents, if you will, through modern novel assisted reproductive technology. So our work naturally sort of puts us in that space of another way of using another person's body in order to bring about new life. And there's all kinds of problems, if you can imagine. I mean, as a pediatric nurse, maternal-child bonding, we know in the medical literature how good it is for mothers and babies to bond even before the babies are born, and even more so after. And that babies know their mother. Baby knows when they're born. They know their mothers. They don't know that this is a woman who was paid to surrender me at birth for $30,000. They go, where is that person that I've known for the last 9 months? And it's another way of instrumentally somebody else's body, which I have, huge ethical, well, it's just the risk, to the woman's health.
So these women essentially are renting out their wombs for other people, either two homosexuals or in some cases single men or single women,
or infertile married heterosexual couples, women who've had, hysterectomies for whatever reason.
Or famous rich women that don't want to carry their own child, so they pay somebody else to do the dirty work.
Again, my backyard of Hollywood. Yes, we don't want to be burdened. Time Magazine had a list several years back, the top 10 chores to outsource, and pregnancy was number one.
Unbelievable.
So it's a chore that you can ask somebody else.
So essentially that woman has opted to allow her baby to be gestated by somebody else, if that's the right way to put it. And the baby's going to bond with this other woman who then the baby's then going to be torn from after birth and given to the one who paid all the money.
Yes. Seen it even, the web even goes further out. So other little children in the home see mommy pregnant, little children go, oh, we're having a baby, we're going to have a brother or sister, and they get all excited. And then they're told, no, we're not keeping this baby. And
Yeah.
What? Is this what mommies do? And what does that do to marriages, between the intimacy of when your wife is carrying maybe even a baby for a stranger, or not a stranger, maybe for a family member? What happened with Sarah and Hagar and Abraham? I mean, once that baby was born, the Old Testament tells us that Sarah despised Hagar.
Yeah. Yeah, so because she didn't want the competition.
And said, do with her what you want. Yeah, because it does. It violates the intimacy of a husband and wife by bringing in a third party.
Yeah. You made the point at the talk that you said your line in the sand is that when this stuff happens outside the womb, then you have ethical problems.
Yes. The bright line for me is, what can medicine do to help a couple who otherwise is having problems with conceiving, that does not require eggs to be removed from the woman's body or sperm to be removed from a man's body and life to be made in the laboratory. And what can we do within the proper scope of medicine, within the healing and treating model, which is, to me, the proper role of medicine: healing, treating, eliminating suffering. And there is much that can be done, but because we found this workaround and because it's very profitable, we've seemed to have forgotten what maybe medicine should be trying to offer.
And there is what they call NAPRO. There's natural assisted reproductive technologies as well that are ethical, correct?
No, I will not say that NAPRO technology solves all problems with infertility, because it can't. I mean, it doesn't deal with male infertility, and 1/3 of all infertility is usually a male factor problem. So that's going to still, there's just going to be the reality, as there was before since the beginning of time, that there will be people that will not be able to bear their own biological children. And how do we deal with that as a society? In the olden days, we dealt with it by we just knew that was the reality. We didn't have much to offer. People opted to either remain childless, they opted to foster children, maybe they adopted children. Those were the things that they opted for. So it wasn't like we had hundreds and hundreds of years before this technology where life sort of still went on. With the reality of people who couldn't have children.
And you said in your presentation that adoption has become a last resort, that people prefer to have their own biological matter as children, and therefore adoptions become a last resort.
Well, and because children have become seen as commodities, as entitled, we have a right to. We have this technology. I have a right to use it. I have the financial resources to access this technology. So we've stopped seeing children as they should be seen, which are gifts, not property, not something to be owned or acquired. And I think that's the attitude is really troubling to me, of how we stopped seeing children as they truly ought to be seen.
And you talked about in your talk, you said how you talked about selective. I learned a new vocabulary. You talked about selective reductions, savior siblings, and grandmother surrogacy. Could you really quickly define each one of those for us?
Selective reduction is when you look on ultrasound and there's either something wrong with one of the babies that's growing in the womb, or there's too many babies you don't want. So you terminate. You pick and choose which ones live and which ones die. And
in that case, you could have a woman whose womb has been rented, who ends up with twins or triplets, and then she's told, because of the contract that she signs, that now she has to abort one or two of them, right?
Yes, and we had two very famous cases like that just recently out here in California with surrogates that were told that. You asked about savior siblings. That's when you have a sick child who needs a bone marrow transplant. Anybody who knows anything about transplants knows you have to match donor to recipient. So you create a bunch of embryos in the lab. You find out which one's the genetic match to the sick child who's already alive, and you bring that child to birth, so that when that child is born, you can acquire the stem cells from the cord blood and you can give a transplant to the sick sibling, and that's saved the sibling, the savior sibling. And then you asked about grandmother surrogacy. I mean, there's a whole movement for older women, postmenopausal, either carrying their own grandchildren to term for their daughters who for some reason can't carry a pregnancy to term, or just older women, that are grandmothers, deciding they want to have more children. There was a woman in Madrid, Spain the other day, I just put it on Facebook, who just gave birth to twins, and she's well in her 60s.
And I think you said the oldest woman to ever give birth was 70 years old?
And I believe it was a woman in India. Mm-hmm. And she and her husband had never had a son, and they used the technology to, on purpose, have a male child so that they could leave their property, their estate, to their male heir. Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks for very quickly defining those things. I mean, by the way, back to the savior sibling, that child doesn't die. It's just that his cord blood is used to save his brother or sister or whatever. But all of the embryos that were made that didn't match, presumably they got aborted. They got flushed or something, right? Yeah, they probably did not get implanted determined. And honestly, there could have been 2 or 3 of the embryos created that were a genetic match that could have done the job. So the couple picks one. But what does it do to you as a human being to know how you were selected and why you were given life, versus you were just fearfully and wonderfully made and you were a gift and a blessing?
Now, another problem here, and you mentioned it towards the end of your talk in Concord, and this is one of those things. I think I gasped out loud when you said this one. You said that some of these. I said we wouldn't talk about sperm donation, but just very quickly, some of these sperm donors were, for want of a better word, very prolific or very, very active,
Yeah.
and some of them have sired, hundreds of offspring. I read a little bit of, I read a couple of articles on it, and some of these guys have gotten themselves famous. It's a very gross subculture of men who want to generate a reckless amount of offspring by donating their sperm. There's one guy who's Canadian who pops, on one side and the other of the border and donates. He's got all kinds of offspring, surrounding the U.S.-Canadian border somewhere around New York. One of the problems you pointed out is these children oftentimes don't know who their fathers are, and there's a very real possibility that you will have an accidental union of siblings in the future.
Yes, or even half siblings. That this is how reckless lack of monitoring and oversight and tracking and just the seedy, no pun intended, business here.
Okay.
My film Anonymous Father's Day is a documentary that features now young men and women who are here because of anonymous sperm donation. And what does that mean to them? As a human being, I don't know who I look like. I don't know who this man is. I don't know his whole side of my family. What if I fall in love with a half brother or a half cousin or something? It's creepy weird. And the fact that these children know that this man did something, pretty disgusting for maybe $50 or $100, and did it over and over again.
Yeah.
It's kind of disgusting and creepy to know that that's your biological father.
Yeah. I mean, and that understates it. I mean, it's like you could have accidental incest. This is how, and it could become routine. It could become widespread, and then you can have a multitude of birth defects as a result of this. So much for progress in medicine. Yes. Now, you made a brief reference, and I looked it up to IVG, which is apparently a cutting-edge technology. It's not been done on humans yet. I think they did it with mice.
Yes.
But this could be the way of the future. Could you tell us what IVG is?
Well, the whole push, and I think, we will take some credit because of the work that we do to get people to stop poaching eggs and buying random stranger creepy dude's sperm, is to make synthetic eggs and sperm. So actually just making, like we make other things. So we won't need, so if you're a couple that's sterile, we can use your skin stem cells and manufacture egg or sperm or both, if that's what you're as a couple are missing, so that you can create your own children using your own genetic material. And, once this technology takes off, if it takes off, I mean, right now, like you say, they're only doing it in mice, and so far they're having successes, so the science is moving forward. They basically say at any given moment, you could just create, I think the headline I posted was vats of human embryos. It gets back to the commodification, the manufacturing, the designer baby. Just make a whole bunch of them and pick and choose the children you want. Have them on a shelf for whenever you're ready for them. Your own genetic children. Is this progress? I don't think so. Is this a good way to head?
Well, one of the articles that I read said that, now you mentioning that this can come from skin cells, but one of the articles that I read said that that a sperm cell could be turned into an egg, or an egg into a sperm cell.
Yes, and that's a little bit farther out, I think, as far as the technology. So far they've been trying to, just manufacture eggs and sperm. But yes, you're right. So we, technically, if that actually comes to fruition, men could make eggs and not even need a woman. And we already have artificial wombs for animals. We gestate animals in artificial wombs. So could we become so obsolete we don't even need men and or women to gestate the next generation of people?
Yeah, Elon Musk, you must know who that is, right?
Oh, the Tesla, of course.
Yeah, the Tesla
Musk.
guy, the SpaceX guy,
Wants to go to Mars.
He wants to go to Mars. He wants to do a lot of stuff. I mean, the guy's a genius. He's obviously a Type A personality. he's very busy. He's a multi-billionaire. But Elon Musk said that if humans are going to be relevant in the future, in order not to be sort of outcompeted by robots, we have to join them and become cyborgs.
Yes. That's the faking of life stuff.
So that's where we talk about the faking of life. Now, towards the end of your talk, you just touched on the fact that there are emerging technologies that will make it so that soldiers don't have to sleep, so that certain kinds of people can have implantations in their eyes so that they'll have perfect aim, whatever, for their
Dropping
military.
Bombs.
Yeah, dropping bombs. So yeah, ending life. Isn't that funny how it all ends up with the messing up the life cycle? So I mean, is this heading us towards cyborg technology?
Well, there's a lot of people that, in the Silicon Valley, they're pressing their envelope. If you look at the work of Ray Kurzweil, Ray Kurzweil, the Kurzweil keyboards, he wants to live forever. He wants to overcome immortality through technology. Becoming, the whole movement called the transhumanist movement, human beings is going to be, old low tech pretty soon. And we're going to be these cyborgs. We're going to be integrated. We're going to have technology integrated into our humanness. And at one point, we'll become more technology and less human, to the point where we just cross over and we're living in our virtual neural networks out there. And, whatever I'm thinking, everybody who's in my neural network knows what I'm thinking. So, will we be able to do a lot of this? A lot of this, I think, is hubristic. I mean, if you look at the Tower of Babel, and they were climbing and they were building and they were going to be up there and they were going to get to God and they were going to be like God, and then the narrator in the book says, and then God looked down.
Yeah.
So there's a point where I think there's a lot of but I also do think that we are already seeing the blurring of technology into our humanness. And will we start not just wearing glasses and not wearing hearing aids, but have chips and implants and things like that? And we do know that the federal budget, the DARPA, is really funding a lot of the stuff so we can make, really strong warriors that, like you said, don't have to sleep, can go long periods of time without eating. We do it already when you look at students studying at exam time, all the drugs, we drink coffee to wake ourselves up. We take Ritalin, so will this just be the next wave of, the things that we already do now, to overcome the human frailties of aging, immortality, tiredness, getting old.
In other words, all the normal stuff that comes with being a human.
Exactly. But, when you look at it, what are we going to have? Where are we going to stop aging? Are we going to, have a period where we're adolescent teenagers for 40 years? Oh, God help us. Can you imagine being 14 or 15 for 40 years?
Actually, I think that already exists. It's called the modern male.
Yeah. Okay. Good point. But in reality, what they're trying to do is just make us live longer. So, we're still all going to hit 60, 70, and 80, but then we're going to live to 90, 100, and 120. So we won't extend the whole lifespan, in gradual increments. We'll just all kind of get old and then live for 40 more years, in these new bodies. I don't even know what that looks like. But that, that is an area that our work is involved in, because that's what's coming. And we can't just look at what's happening now, but what's coming down the road.
And ultimately, it's going to be the same principles that apply. You've crossed, right? I mean, ethically, you've crossed the Rubicon when you've fertilized a baby outside of the womb.
Yes.
When you've conceived a baby.
What does it mean to be human? Fully human, in the whole image and likeness of the fully human Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
who lived and died and rose again.
Yeah, and who was conceived in his mother's womb,
Exactly.
and who had
Exactly.
who's probably the best instance of maternal child bonding that ever existed. I mean, so the as soon as you divorce, no pun intended, the whole family from offspring, you've got a problem.
Yes, yes, you do. And you have many ethical, legal, medical, philosophical, theological problems. And that's bioethics, where all those, those roads come together. And we like to say that bioethics is a conversation. And our organization is about having those kinds of meaningful conversations about what does it mean to be human? What does it look like to be human in this 21st century?
Now, are you changing people's minds? Do you see an impact with your work?
Absolutely. That's how I get up out of bed every day and keep doing this.
Oh, you mean you still have to sleep?
I mean, I spoke to, I don't know how many people were at the talk that I gave when you were there. I don't know, maybe 200 people.
Yeah.
And they came up to me afterwards and they bought every single video I brought. And, the head of the group that invited me said, you're like one of the best speakers we've had in years. I mean, those encouraged me. I mean, you had never heard of this stuff. And now I'm talking to you again and on your radio program to your listeners. So that's very encouraging.
You said something in your talk that was very curious. Actually, I mean, it makes sense because you're talking about ultimately with this egg donor thing and with the surrogacy thing, you're talking about essentially exploiting women. And as a result, you have allies in an area that we wouldn't maybe expect allies, the far left feminists, including the National Organization of Women. You've done things in concert with them in order to end some of these programs of surrogacy and egg donation, right?
Yes. I mean, the beautiful thing about the work that we do is I like to say people haven't become tribal. So people haven't made up their mind on these issues because, for one, they're just woefully uninformed about them. So once you can quickly inform people, they kind of go, oh, so we don't have to do a lot of work swaying people's opinion. We have a lot of work to do educating people. And our issues are what I would call Big Ten issues. So you can find very diverse, co-belligerent, unlikely bedfellows, if you will, to work very closely together. And so my work naturally gravitates toward working with very strong feminists who don't want to see wealthy people exploiting low-income people. The people on the left, I'm in the backyard of Berkeley. I have 2 daughters that went to UC Berkeley. My husband's a UC Berkeley alumni. Where was the disability community founded? Well, it was founded in Berkeley. So the left is very friendly to the disabled community, and they know very well that we target, disabled embryos. We want perfect children. We don't want handicapped children. So there's a lot of, ground, if you will, to fertile ground to work on. And,
Boy,
and to,
you're full of puns.
Bridges.
Yeah, unfortunately, your field it provides a lot of material for puns. So there is a lot of bridge building. It would be great. It would be great if somebody could figure out how to build the bridge totally, so that there could be some understanding of the more fundamental ethical issues that join all of these things together. About the family and so forth, and that the real answer, the real solution is the preserving the nuclear family.
Yes. Well, in due time, that's the nature of the fallen world and the messy world that we live in, is that, people, myself included, I came late to this party myself.
You became a pro-lifer. I think you said you were 40 years old, right?
Yes,
after
exactly.
studying the bioethics.
Like I said, I'm late to the party.
Yeah. So I guess that's why you work so much, because you're making up for lost time.
Well, but I feel very comfortable with those feminists on the left, because I identified as one of them for so long. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't feel unusual. It doesn't feel false or phony or forced. It's, I swam in that water for a very, very long time. So, but that, my own personal story gives me hope that people can still have their minds and their hearts changed. So,
Well, hopefully we've done some of that tonight, and people who hear this will at least be educated on these issues themselves for their own families,
And tell them
for
to
their
watch
own
the
daughters.
movies.
Yes, yes. And by the way, so I'm going to have links to that on our website, on the reconquest.net site, so they can get to the movies. I put the previews of all of your movies on our own website at Catholicism.org.
Oh, God bless you.
Well,
and if you want a special deal I offered at my talk, which was just $10.
Okay.
Which is half price.
Oh, wow.
I don't know if that helps. I don't know if that helps your listeners. But...
Such a deal. Good. Well, look, we've run out of time, Jennifer. Thank you so much for being my guest. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's been my joy. I've had a good time with you.
Well, thank you for listening to Reconquest on the Crusade channel of the Veritas Radio Network, radio the way it should be. God bless, and Mary keep you.